Solving multiple step equations. So we have 5 steps. We have distributive property, combine like terms, get variables to one side, undo adding and subtracting, and undo multiplying and dividing. You have to do them in this order in order to solve any equation that you're doing. Okay, so first we have to ask ourselves, distributive property. Do we have it? Yes, we do. We have it right here, -8 times parentheses 6 plus 5n. So this is the same thing as 8 sets of 6 plus 5n. And then we change the sign. That's what the negative sign means. So we're going to undo this. So it's -8 times 6, which is -48. -8 times the 5n, which is -40n. Then I still have 3n minus 5 on the left. I don't do anything with that. So the next thing that I have to do is look at, do I have like terms on either side? So I don't have like terms on the same side here or the same side here. So I'm going to move on. Now I need to see if I have variables on both sides where I need to move them to one side. And yes, I do. I have variables on both sides. So when I'm going to do this one, I'm going to check for the coefficient, that's the number being multiplied by the variable, and which one's smaller. Well, in this case, -40 is smaller than 3. So we do not want to have to add a 6th step of changing the signs at the end if we can avoid that. So we're going to add 40n and make sure you're adding the 40 and the n, and what you do on one side, you do on the other. Okay. So this is 0. I still have an equal sign here. I still have a -48 that I bring down on the right. This is 43n, and this is a -5 that I bring down. Okay, so this 48 does not have a variable attached to it, so the like term is the 5, so we're going to move that. So I'm going to add 5 to both sides, because what I do on one side, I do on the other. On this side, it becomes 0. On the other side, it's -48 plus 5, which is a -41. And this is 43n that I bring down. Oh, sorry, not -41, -43. Okay, so then I'm going to get n by itself and positive. So I need to divide the 43 out to make one whole. And what I do on one side, I do on the other. So 43 divided by 43 is 1, and negative divided by a positive is a negative. Now I want to make sure that this works, so I put the value for n back into the original equation. So my original equation was 3 times n, which is -1. Subtract 5 from that. And then I have -8 times 6 plus 5 times the n, which is -1. Okay, and I do PEMDAS, so I have to do the parentheses first, right? So this is 6, and this is a -5. 5 times -1 is -5, which is 1. And 1 times -8 is -8. Then on the other side, I have 3 times -1, which is -3, minus a 5, and this is really the same thing as adding these together. And you also have -8. So as long as both sides match, you're good to go. That means that you have the correct answer. Remember, you shouldn't be turning in anything, any test, homework, anything like that, without checking to make sure. You should already know if you have the correct answer or not. And if you don't, go back and double check where you went wrong. And then see how I split it up? That way I can look at, this is one step, another step that I did to break this down to where n equals -1 here. Okay, so we're going to use these same 5 steps, and they have to be done in that order. So the next one that we're going to do is one that actually has a little strange thing right here, because there's a negative sign, but there's no number right here. What this means is this is, yes, distributive property. It's the same thing as an invisible 1 here. You're multiplying everything on the inside by a -1, and the only thing that really does is change the signs. So if you just have a minus sign, whether it is here or whether you have a parentheses, a minus sign, and another parentheses, and you're multiplying, here, let's say there's a 3 outside here and you have distributive here, then this is the same thing as changing all the signs that are inside this parentheses. So we have 1 times -1, which, or 1 times -1 times 1, which is -1, -1 times 7x, which is a -7x. So I went from +1 and +7x to just negatives of those. Then I'm going to take this is a negative 6. I'm going to multiply negative 6 times negative 7, and that's a positive 42. Notice I said positive, I put a plus sign. Negative 6 times negative x. Remember, that's still a negative 1x. So if you need to put it in for yourself, put it in. Negative 6 times negative 1 is positive 6 times x, and that equals 36. Okay, my next step is to combine my like terms, and I do that on the same side of the equation. And when I say that, that means the same side of the equal sign. So I have a negative 1, a positive 42, and then the negative 7x and then positive 6x are the same terms as each other, but they cannot all be combined. They're not all the same terms. So it's like having apples and oranges. They are not the same fruit. So I'm going to combine negative 1 and 42, which is just subtracting, and it becomes 41. Negative 7x plus 6x is a negative 1x, and if you have to put the 1 here, put the 1 here, and that still equals 36. All right, so this 36 does not have a variable attached to it, so I am going to move the 41 over here. So if I move the variables to the left, then I need to move the numbers to the right. This is positive, and we know that because there's no negative sign, so we're going to subtract 41 to make this 0. Subtract 41 from both sides. This, remember, is a negative x. Bring down the sign, and if you have to, again, put the 1 in, put it in. Positive 36 and negative 41, subtract them, keep the sign of the one that's furthest away from 0. This is negative 5. Remember, this was a negative x, is negative 5. So positive x is the opposite of that, which is positive 5. And we double check that by actually plugging it back in. So we have 1 plus 7 times 5. We get an answer. And remember, there's a negative sign outside. Then we're subtracting 6 times, inside this parentheses here, is a negative 7 minus, and then that, remember, you're only substituting just for the x. That's just the positive 5. And you're going to get confused if you have negatives here or minuses. Okay, so inside here, this is 36 because it's 35 plus 1 times a negative 1 is negative 36. Inside here is a negative 12, and you're multiplying that by a negative 6 here. That's positive 72. If you were to take these, remember, they're supposed to equal 36 on this side as well. So 72 minus 36, I'm going to borrow. 12 minus 6 is 6, and 6 minus 3 is 3. They match, so we know we're correct. Okay, so the next one that we're going to do is even longer, and this was the one that people get confused on because there's so many items, but you're still doing these first 5. So let's go back to this one. You're still doing these steps in this exact order. You just have to undo more things at each step. So step 1, distributive property. I have 2 of them, so I'm going to undo those. I'm not going to touch the right yet. So again, negative 5 times 1 is negative 5. Okay, negative 5 times negative 5x is positive 25x. And this is a positive 5 being multiplied by a negative 8x, so that's negative 40x. And a positive 5 times a negative 2 is a negative 10. And then I'm going to leave these alone for now. I'll do something with them in a second. So I bring those down because they are not distributive, and that's the step I'm currently on. So now that I'm finished with that, my next step is to combine the like terms on the same side. So again, 5 and 10 can go together. So it's negative 5 and negative 10 adding together, that's a negative 15. And you have a positive 25x and a positive or a negative 40x. So that's negative 15x. And that's going to equal your negative, oh, actually we need to combine like terms here. So negative 4 and plus negative 8 x's is negative 12, and then you just put the x because it's being multiplied. So now our next step is to do variables on both sides. If we have variables on both sides, get them to one side. Now this is a little bit different because this negative 12 has the x attached to it over here, and that's the only thing. Do not move to the left. You will leave your balance permanently unbalanced. You have no choice but to move the 15 to the other side. Okay, so we're going to add 15x because it has an x, so those are the same terms. Zero it out. What you do on one side, you do on the other. Okay? Remember, this is a negative 15 that comes down. Bring the sign with it. This is a positive 3x. So my last step is to do multiplying and dividing. So this is a multiplying problem. If it looked like a fraction, like x over 3, then we know that's 1/3 times x, or x over 3 is a division problem, and you would undo by multiplying the denominator out. In this case, when it looks kind of like you're writing a word, this is multiplying when there's nothing in between. And we're not going to put a dot there either, because then it looks like decimals. So you put them together like this, that's multiplying. Undo by dividing. I have to leave the x by itself and positive. So I'm going to divide out anything else. So in this case, it's the 3. This is 1 whole, not 0. And what you do on one side, you do on the other. So this is negative 15 divided by 3. So 15 divided by 3 is 5, and a negative divided by a positive is a negative, because if you have one negative, nothing to cancel it out. But if you have two negatives, you can cancel them out and it becomes positive. So this is supposed to be our answer for x. So now let's plug it back in. And yes, it's going to take a little bit of time. Let me make sure I'm over it far enough. Okay, so we have negative 5, 1 minus 5 times a negative 5. Remember, this is also a negative. We're going to add that to 5 times, you have a negative 8 times a negative 5, because that was x, like we had here. And I'm going back to the original problem. And then we have inside the parentheses minus a 2. So you kind of have a parentheses within a parentheses here. And then on the other side, you have negative 4, remember, times a negative 5. And then minus 8 times your negative 5. So they should equal each other if we have the correct answer. Okay, so negative 5 times negative 5 is positive 25 and a positive 1. So it's really 26 times your negative 5. So we know it's negative. Multiply it together. 6 times 5 is 30. 5 times 2 is 10. Plus 1, 2, 3 is 13. So it's a negative 130 in this section. This section here, negative 8 times negative 5 is negative 40. I'm sorry, positive 40 minus 2 is 38. And we're multiplying it by this 5 here. It's going to stay positive. So 40, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 to make a 19 here to make 190. So this side is really 190 minus 130, which is 60. So this side should equal 60. So let's double check. So this was a negative here. So we have negative 4 times negative 5 is positive 20, and negative 8 times negative 5 is positive 40. You have $40 and $20 make $60. These match. Check. We know that negative 5 is our answer to x.